Welcome back to the Great World Podcast. I'm your host, Isaac Hedges, joined by co-host Jake Fulmer. Jake, what are we looking at today?
Today we'll be looking at current events, including the Middle East conflict, the No Kings military protest, and a Canadian travel ban. We'll also be talking a little bit about kings and what really is a king.
A lot of stuff going on. Let's get right into it.
Yes, there certainly is quite a bit, and I guess we'll start off with the Middle East conflict, since tensions are rising between two countries in particular, one of our allies, U.S. ally Israel, as well as Iran.
Right.
So some strikes have been traded between the two countries the last week. Do we think there's going to be an end to it, or is it going to continue?
Well, it's really tough to say. I'm not sure what to think on that one. What about you?
Well, I know that the U.S. has been trying to make a deal with Iran, and because that deal was not made within 60 days, on the 61st day, that's when Israel went ahead and made the attack from the inside. And then there's been retaliation from Iran since then. Mm-hmm. And so I think it really depends on, will a deal be made between the three countries that we're talking about here?
Right.
Will the U.S. be able to make a deal with Iran in order to stop the conflict with one of our allies?
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So is there any other information worth knowing that we know about at this point on this conflict between Israel and Iran?
Well, we know that last week there was a G7 meeting that took place.
Right, and I heard that was interrupted, wasn't it?
It was. On Monday the 16th, that evening, Trump had to leave early for a meeting the following day in the Situation Room, where they were going to talk about whether or not to go ahead and get the U.S. military involved within that conflict in the Middle East.
And do we know much about how that meeting went?
Well, it seems like that there's plenty of plans that have been put in place, but Trump would like to give some time to see if any deal is able to be made, to see what would be the next step, like until taking that next step, let's say.
Well, what that covers, unless there's anything else you might add about that particular conflict.
Well, we know that Israel has been at war with many different groups and countries over the decades. It became independent back in 1947 after World War II. And we're going to be talking about a future invasion on Israel that has not yet happened later on this summer, so you can stay tuned for more information about that.
Stay tuned for that. It'll be an interesting one.
Yeah, it'll be a part of our debate series that we're going to be starting here very soon. So
it will, and if you have any other contributions you'd like to make, if you'd like to contribute on one of the debate episodes, if you have a topic that you're interested in hearing about, just let us know. You can email it to us, gwp-international@att.net. That's gwp-international@att.net, or you can just put it in a comment below this video. So let us know what you think on that. What else are we looking at, Jake?
Well, we're also going to be looking at a recent ban, or not necessarily ban on travel, but an advisory,
An advisory on travel.
Yes. Not a ban, a travel advisory.
So this travel advisory, where was this advisory issued, and when was it? Do we know? It must have been pretty recent.
Yeah, a couple weeks ago there was a travel advisory that was issued on Canada, mainly because of the ongoing wildfires. So that has been a major issue for quite some time, and it has continued to get worse. And so now there's some concerns about people traveling in and out of Canada.
Really? So wildfires in Canada currently?
Yes, and they've spread pretty rapidly, and now we're looking at even some fires in the U.S. The air quality has gone down, and it's really become a problem the last few years. We didn't really hear a whole lot about these Canadian wildfires until it was about 2 years ago, if anybody might remember, where New York City ended up having the worst air quality in the world at one point in time. The sky turned orange, the visibility was really bad, you could just smell it in the air, and the air quality was really bad across really the entire northern half of the country for several weeks. And it was in June of 2023, and then it kind of went away. And then we saw that once again last year, but not as bad. And then now we're seeing it once again this year. And so that travel advisory has been issued now once again.
Right, so Canadian wildfires, certainly not unheard of, but it has been a little while, and they have been ongoing, it sounds like. We just haven't heard as much about it, perhaps because, we've had some wildfires of our own fairly recently. So.
Yeah. We had the LA wildfire crisis, of course, earlier this year that we talked about back in January on the podcast.
Right, and we covered that to a fair extent now. Now, what kind of separates the two, or that there are probably some important distinctions between the fires that happened earlier this year in California and what's going on now in Canada. Do we know much of the detail as far as what parts of Canada, how quickly it's spreading, what's going on there?
So we've got the western region of Canada. The southwestern really seems to be where the worst of the fires have been.
Okay.
Now, there are some positives in comparison to the LA fires, and then there's some negatives.
All right.
One of those positives would be that it's over an area that's much less populated.
Okay, that's great.
Than where we had it in LA, where we had homes and businesses pretty much burning anytime there was an active fire. Not necessarily as much with these more rural communities that have been impacted in Canada.
Right, so that's great. It means not as many people will be affected, but on the other hand, it means probably they don't have as much to work with as far as fire departments in the area if there's not as much population. So
containment.
Give and take on there.
Yeah, so containment is going to be a lot more difficult, and they're more numerous. Where the LA fires were down to about 6 or 7 fires, there's over 100 active wildfires in Canada.
Right.
And so that makes not only the air quality is a lot worse, but it's over a larger region, even if it's less populated.
So this might be in a little bit deeper. But as far as the way things are set up, I can't say I'm familiar. Do you have any idea how fire departments are set up in Canada and exactly what that arrangement is based on the areas where the fire's going on? Like, I know that in the fires in California, and obviously it's common across the United States, if you have one fire department that's fairly tied up manning a fire, and then they need some more, the next fire department over will come to lend a hand. Presumably, it's a similar setup in Canada. Would you say so?
Yeah, I would say that it is. I don't know if there's any major differences between how it's ran. But
sure, I certainly can't say I'm an expert on Canadian fire departments.
Yeah, but I do know that they are spreading pretty quickly, and that it is affecting a large area, even if it's not very populated. I would say as long as we don't have, big cities like Edmonton or Toronto, as long as those areas are not catching on fire, then I think we would be fine. If Toronto were to catch on fire, obviously things would be a lot worse, because there's actually nearly 90% of the Canadian population is just within Toronto, and so that would make it a lot more devastating for Canadians.
So we've said that where these fires are going on in Canada, one distinct benefit, mainly over the fires we had recently in California, is that the population isn't nearly as much. That means that not as many people are affected by it. That said, do we know anything about if there have been deaths or injuries associated with it, or is everyone all right to this point? What do you know about that?
Yeah, I haven't heard of that as a major concern.
Okay, that's good.
Not really. I would say the threat isn't really direct deaths or injuries like from the actual fire itself, but we have seen over time some injuries in the form of smoke.
Okay, from smoke inhalation.
Excessive intake of smoke has really become a problem. And it's not like a normal wildfire that we have here in the United States. There's actually a lot of chemicals that are within these fires. There's chemicals that are on the ground in Canada that we don't have because it's illegal here in the U.S. And so because those chemicals are burning within the ground in the brush, that's making it a lot more dangerous for the smoke that we're inhaling from the wildfires. And it's even been linked to, if you take in a lot of that wildfire smoke over time, it can even be led to speeding up Alzheimer's or even memory loss. So you might think that it's just a short-term problem, but we'll notice that over long-term it actually causes health problems that you may not even notice until decades later.
Right, so these chemicals on the ground in Canada, do we know what sort of chemicals they are, what we're talking about here exactly?
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure what
exactly
those
sure.
chemicals are.
Presumably, it's my guess would be something industrial,
Yes,
waste runoff from factories, different things like that.
Yeah, and I think now that you do mention that, that is where a lot of those chemicals did come from, as well as some of the buildings. I mean, we did mention there weren't a lot of structures that were burning,
Right.
but there are still some, even in the rural communities, and some of the structures are made out of different materials.
Right.
And so that's where some of those chemicals would come
Right,
from.
and of course, as you said, in the United States, things like that, with more regulations on that from an industrial standpoint, as far as what chemicals you can use and, what can be burned and everything. And, again, as a side note, that's why we see increasingly, a lot of American companies offshoring their manufacturing to places that don't have those regulations, like in China. But you do hear stories about where people go to China, the central cities, and all of the smoke and the smog. It's quite a lot if you've ever seen pictures from there. So maybe not quite as bad in Canada, but I'm guessing it's a similar sort of thing there.
Yeah, it can get to those levels at times, and there's been lots of air quality alerts here in the U.S. from that wildfire smoke. It really has to do with the wind direction. Like anytime you get a cold front, the wind comes out of the north, and that draws in the smoke from Canada down into the U.S. mainland.
Right.
And so if you are traveling or if you live in any of those areas that have been dealing with the smoke, check your air quality, and if it's not very good, then you might want to consider wearing a mask, possibly staying indoors. And one thing that you can do if you're not able to do any of those things that could really make a difference is set your car AC to recirculate. That's a really helpful thing.
Right, recirculate, meaning that it would recycle the air on the inside of the car as opposed to drawing it from the outside.
Yeah.
Of course, because in that case you'd be drawing in air from the outside that may contain some fumes from some of those chemicals.
Yeah.
So that's no bueno, especially in the enclosed area that your car is. So
yeah,
no, don't want to be doing that. Would not recommend it. So what else are we looking at today, Jay?
So that was another major news story from a couple weeks ago. Of course, just recently, on Saturday, June the 14th, we had the 250th anniversary of the Army.
A major event, and we talk about that a little bit later, correct?
Yes. In fact, we went ahead and a couple weeks ago when that did take place, we went ahead and recorded that night after the parade a few things that we would like to go ahead and share for you, and that's where the remaining part of this episode is going to be. So I think we're going to go ahead and transition to what we recorded on Saturday, June 14th, the night of the parade.
Right, so that was previously recorded, but a lot of great stuff there. You'll want to check it out. We'll see you later, folks.
And now we're joining you this evening here on the 250th anniversary of the Army/parade that took place today in Washington, D.C. A very major and what will go down as a historical event that took place. But it will also be remembered for the No Kings protest that took place nationwide. Do you have any information on that? I know that you recently traveled to D.C. earlier this week.
Yes, well, when I was there, I wasn't exactly watching a great deal of news, but sort of exploring D.C. for the first time. But I did notice that on the phone poles there, quite a lot of them, there were stickers that said, "No Kings since 1776. Sure, all right, I said, for a way to put it on the phone pole. I was not aware of this group at the time, but apparently their objection is mainly to the recent parade, the parade that we just saw today, on the military parade. And I guess sort of what's implied by their name, No Kings, um, is that president is sort of behaving more like a king. At least that's what they believe. But is he really? I don't know. What do you think about it, pal?
I don't see any behaviors that we would see from a
I wouldn't
king.
say so. I think that's a bit of a stretch. I mean, I can see their frustration, as in anything that costs money. But at the same time, it isn't every day that you have the 250th anniversary of the U.S. Army. So it's not as if it was done without reason.
Now, I know some of the biggest complaints that I've heard from the protesters is, well, I can actually hear them. They're right outside of my office right here. That's what that you might hear some yelling in the background. They've actually now continued um, into the night. I just keep hoping that I don't get a broken window or something. But what I keep hearing them chant is that they feel like, that Trump, that the president, that he's been acting sort of like a king, and that he really did this all for himself, this parade, partially because it's also his 79th birthday
That's the
today.
accusation going around.
Yeah, that's one of the main concerns that people have, is that all of this is mainly being done because, I mean, the fact is it was President Trump's idea. Okay, he is the one who created the idea to do this whole parade, and a lot of people argue that if he wanted to recognize the army, he should have done something that maybe they would have liked to have seen. Do we have any reason to believe that the army was against doing this parade, the anniversary?
No, no, not that I'm aware of.
Yeah, and so
I think
that's
it's sort
part
of
of it. Now, it is possibly understandable how some could say that he's doing it for his birthday, but you think if he was doing this for himself, that he would find some other way to celebrate his birthday that doesn't necessarily involve the rest of the nation, if that's
right.
really what his
Absolutely.
agenda was.
Absolutely, and you made an interesting point, Jake. You say that he came up with this. This was a fairly large scale event. Anyone who was there or who witnessed it, or even frankly the people protesting it who were aware of it or aware that it's a large scale event. A lot of planning went into it, and I don't know about you, but planning such a large scale event on my birthday. That wouldn't be my cup of tea. That wouldn't be my birthday wish. What about you?
I don't think it would be for me. Now, it is true, though, that we're, in a different position in our life. We're not really the
Naturally, we're
president.
not president of the United States, but
Yeah,
I
and
suppose there is
I'm glad that there's
some
not two at
comparison,
the same time.
if minor.
Yeah, and I think we're still able to come to, some partial understanding as to what he might possibly want to do on his birthday. I mean, some could say that he would want to have, more of a celebration at the White House, even if it's just kind of a small one. But I would say that if he was making this all about himself, he probably wouldn't have been recognizing the fact that it was the 250th anniversary. So I
Right.
would say that really by this effort, we're really seeing quite the opposite. It's not really selfishness, it's really selflessness.
Right. Right. Absolutely. Because it really isn't for him. It's for the U.S. Army. And that said, you mentioned it being the 250th anniversary of it, particularly monumental because of that, just how long it's been around at this point. Now, just to clear that up, there were some that believed it was the 250th anniversary of the United States. It's not. This is just the 250th anniversary of the U.S. Army, though the 250th anniversary of the United States is fast approaching, and it's likely that we'll see some more festivities for that. You have any information on that, Jake?
I can't say that I have too much information. I have heard a little bit from some different of the, some of the media has been talking a little bit about that. If we've already seen this for the 250th Army anniversary, then we'll likely see even a bigger celebration when we reach Independence Day of next year, because that's when the 250th anniversary of America will be in July of 2026.
Mm-hmm.
Now, and I think there maybe should also be some other clarification
Yes.
of exactly when the Declaration of Independence was written. It was written on July 2nd of 1776. It wasn't until July 4th that all the signatures
Right.
that were
It was
needed were actually
ratified.
present. So some could even say that July 2nd is when America gained its independence.
Right. Some would, though. Traditionally, when it had all those signatures and when it was ratified, so to speak, was on July 4th. So, for all intents and purposes, that is when it took effect, and so that's why we celebrate Independence Day on the 4th of July. And if you ask me, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah, I think it does, but I wouldn't be surprised if next year for the 250th anniversary if both dates are recognized. So we'll see if that ends up happening. Either way, I think it'll certainly be spectacular, whatever it will be next year.
Absolutely. And just to circle back a little bit, what I was mentioning earlier, when I first saw it in DC, I saw these stickers on these telephone poles that said "No King since 1766." So I wasn't sure what the purpose of those stickers were. You'd be like, sure, obviously that's when we became an independent nation. What's the other significance of that? And so actually, this organization that was protesting most recently the military parade, though they have a couple of other issues. If you check out their website, nokings.org, this state is their mission they have here. As ICE raids escalate and Trump doubles down on authoritarian tactics, including politicizing the military, we're meeting with action. The road ahead isn't just a protest for one day, it's about building a movement powerful enough to win against authoritarian forces dead set on destroying our democracy. Now, what they say there is, they're against authoritarian tactics, and what they see here at the specific mention of military, they say politicizing the military. Now, presumably, that's the particular issue they're on here whenever they object to this military parade. But would we call that politicization of the military?
Well, again, I think it kind of circles back to whatever you think is Trump's motive in doing this parade. Do we think his motive of doing it is for himself, or is it to actually honor the military?
Right, and that's another great point. Presumably, they think he's just doing it for himself. I find that a little bit tough to wrap my head around. But the thing there. Yes. So, any other thoughts on that, Jake?
Well, I would say that probably one of the major things about the protests is that these also have not really been done peacefully as well. And I think that's something else that we should mention, because there was a lot of people that were going around saying that these were. And I will say this, the vast majority of the protests that we did see were peaceful, but we also saw some violence as well, some rioting taking place.
Right.
And so when you think about it, that kind of overrides the No Kings protest in general, because, the idea is that Trump is, being too, I guess you could say too forceful, or that he's doing things that are unconstitutional. When those types of behaviors are unconstitutional in their own right, do you feel like that there's maybe some hypocrisy to that?
I'd say so. I mean, look, when it comes to peaceful protests, look, we may not agree with your cause, but if it's a peaceful protest, you're well within your First Amendment right to do so. Now, when it becomes violent, that's that's when it crosses the line, when it becomes illegal, and very much, I would say, I would say that does seem a bit inconsistent, let's say.
Now, and another thing that was argued, and this goes a little bit back to some of the protest and rioting that had been taking place in Los Angeles prior to the military parade. So this would have been earlier this week, kind of last weekend is when that was taking place. There was also a little bit of violence with that. There was some concern that Trump intervened with that, where it wasn't really his decision, where it was more the city of Los Angeles, the mayor's decision. And we know that that has now actually went to the courtroom. That particular lawsuit has now kind of reached that level.
All right. Is there anything you know about this case?
Well, again, it has a lot to do mainly with that Trump called the National Guard to break up the protest in Los Angeles.
Okay.
And the city's mayor there in Los Angeles says that, we didn't really want any of this extra help. We had it all under control on our own, and we didn't really want it. We didn't really request for it. And so now the question that's being thrown was, did Trump have the authority to send all of that, let's just call it aid, I guess, or, help in keeping things peaceful in Los Angeles? Did he have the authority to make that decision? Or did he need permission from the state of California? Because that could be, that's part of what the No Kings protest is all about.
Right, similar
Trump is doing things that are normal powers that would be more on like a city or a state level and not necessarily a federal level. So what are your thoughts on that?
That's where they take him for the politicization of the military. Well, as far as that goes, you mentioned those couple of sides, and another kind of substrata. There are those that don't necessarily challenge his authority to do that, but say that maybe he shouldn't have. Maybe that wouldn't have been the best use of the military. Say, oh, maybe things weren't necessarily operating well, in the Los Angeles area and in California, but their state government is content with that, and that's perfectly fine. So there's no use putting the National Guard into there if they're going to object to that, or just perhaps there is disorder and chaos there. But if that's going on, they don't want any help, just don't give it to them. So that's another kind of substrate on the side that sure they'd support his authority to do so, or wouldn't necessarily challenge it anyway. But then again, they wouldn't necessarily support him doing so. Here we are here today thanks to Zoom.
So again, that seems to be...
Yes, it does. What was that again, Jake?
Well, do you hear that outside my door?
Outside your door?